So I've gone ahead and rendered out my images for the textures, and what I have are a little over 20 images that I'm going to use, and I've named them as they would be for an image sequence. So they do go in order, 001, 002, and so on, up to 24. So what I want to do is take just the first window and drag it in to the materials, and then double click to create a new material. And first what I need to do is set up a base material for the buildings, because we're not going to be applying the windows to a tag. So it will override everything, and we want the windows to have an alpha. So we're going to go to the building, and just for now I'm going to set up I'm going to go ahead and set up kind of a bluer color, and we're going to apply that to the cloner object, and then take the top selection tag and move that above it. And I'm also going to just open up the material editor, turn on the diffusion, and bring that down to about 50. So now I'm going to double click and create a new material, call it Windows. Select the loaded in material and just go to the color and right click on the texture and copy. Also, if you can't drag and drop, depending on your OS, I'm not sure how the support is for all operating systems, you can just click to load in a texture here if needed. So I'm going to select the windows, and first we're going to go to open up the material editor, select color, go to texture, and under MoGraph select the multi-shader. And then under shader 1 we're going to hit paste, go to that window, and under the animation tab we're going to select calculate. You can see all 24 of those images are showing up as the end frame. And then we're going to select 2 layers. And what this is going to do is create a shader for every single image as part of the sequence and automatically set that all up. So now we need to do the same thing for the alpha. And I am going to do this, instead of copying the entire shader over and pasting it, I am going to go back to that loaded in individual material, copy it, and then paste it in the same way, because otherwise there's a possibility they'll be connected, and I don't want that to happen. Paste, animation, calculate, go back, 2 layers, and under alpha we're going to turn off the soft mode, we're going to invert it. And it does look like I did that in the wrong material. So going back to the Windows, MoGraph, multi-shader, paste, calculate it, 2 layers, turn off soft, invert it, and now what we need to do is set up our control, and we can go ahead and delete that other material. And I'm going to drag that window shader onto the cloner object, move the top above the windows, and then for the window material I'm going to switch over to cubic mapping and change our amount of tiles to 4. I also want to zoom in so we can see this better. Not everything's going to show because of anti-aliasing, so under render settings I'm going to make sure that I have a minimum level of 2, max 4, change my output a little bit higher for the render. And right now it should show basically the same thing on every surface, because there isn't anything controlling the distribution of the material yet. So what we need to do is select the cloner in which the materials are added to. And I also want to note that you can't use any alphas or layering between different objects. It all needs to exist on the same cloner. So selection tags are useful for objects that have them, but if any object within the cloner list has its own material, these overlays or alphas or mixed materials will not apply. They won't show up on them at all. So we're going to select the cloner object, and we're going to add in a random effector. Trying to stay away from the shader effectors just because of how long they can take or how many resources they use. Random effector is a little more efficient, but it might not always do the job. So first we're just going to try the random effector. A lot of the time I end up just going over to a shader, but we'll see if we can do it with a random pretty easily. We're going to go to the transform under the parameter tab, turn off that position, and we're going to turn the color mode on. We're also going to rename this Windows Random. And now if we take a look at render, you can see that every building has a different texture and a different set of windows. Because the alpha and color are matched, they are equal for the alpha and color are being matched up correctly. Looks like we do need to change scales a little bit. So we can go to the tiling mode, maybe set that to 5 on the Y, get some more of those textures showing up. Because I am using the cubic mode, there is going to be a bit of overlapping around the edges. And the next thing we're going to take a look at is randomizing the buildings a little bit more and setting up a texture to cover up areas of the buildings to add more variation. So that will pretty much take care of any of the edges we're going to have, because the next technique is going to be UV mapped. I will note that we may need to change out of the step mode because of the way the UV maps are set up. We'll just kind of have to see once we get to that point. But already you can see some good variation throughout the entire scene. The buildings don't look identical. We've got lots of color variation. And there is one more thing I'm going to do to the material. Open up the material editor. I am going to copy it this time from the color and paste it onto the Lume channel. So the luminance. That way we can set it up for night lighting. So if we did want to have a night shot, now we've got nice glowing lights. We could apply a glow post-process filter in the render settings effect. We can select glow if needed. So there's a lot you can really do with this. The windows are going to show up on anything that isn't that top surface or top selection, because we can't assign polygon selection tags when the extrude deformer is used like this until it's actually baked out. Because we'll lose so much variation doing that, and it could possibly take a lot of time to create new selection tags even if we baked it. We'll need to blend the alpha with the fall off effect. So what we can do to remove the windows around those top trim areas, let's go to the alpha, and we're going to change this over to fusion. So now we have the base channel is that multi-shader, and our blend channel, we're going to set this to fusion. or sorry, not fusion, effects and fall off. I'm going to reset. And we're going to create some new colors. Because we don't have the soft mode on, we can very easily just create a quick gradient. And just keeping with the basically the presets where we have 1 for the Y, so it's controlling the direction up and down. Actually, we'll end up changing our mixing mode. I'm going to turn off the use bump, and then we just need to change how this is going to interact with it. So with the mode set to multiply, I'm going to go to the fall off and invert the knots, and then just manipulate that a little more so that we've got black showing on the right and then white right there. And this is dependent on the Phong shading. So depending on the way the Phong is set up, if there's too much rounding or too much smoothing, it will still apply it to those top surfaces, but we should have been able to remove that now. Looks like I may need to just modify the shader. It is going to show up on the side still, and this is an intersecting object, but it does look like the tops have been mostly taken care of. Might just need to make a few more adjustments. For the most part, I don't see any windows showing except on that smoother area that we can see right there where we had that kind of beveled extrusion. So we just need to basically remove the Phong angles, set them down to, let's say, 5. Making sure we're doing that for all of the objects, even though not all of them at the moment even have those top level extrusions. But that should definitely take care of that. If not, we can modify and reduce that fall off even further, because it does look like where we do have that extrusion, it's way too far out. So we would have to modify the shader for that. Otherwise, what we're going to end up doing is setting up another shader to cover up just the tops of the object. For the most part, with a city this large, we're going to be farther away from it. Or in the end, we can always bake everything out and then select all the tops, which we can do with the tags, maybe extrude them a little further. So it really depends on how much variation you need. It's kind of give and take with some techniques. Looking at a render, seeing more of the buildings, doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good. And the next technique I'm going to show is really going to hopefully take care of some of that additional lighting. Otherwise, what we could do is even just reduce the lume value on some of the top lights. And just one last note before we move on to the next set of textures. You'll notice that the textures are not changing between each of the groups of clones, in other words, the quad clone. And that's because it is applied to the top cloner, which is basically taking those little quad clones and representing those as an individual clone. So if you did need to have the variation within the individual parts of the building and part of the quad cloner object, then the textures need to be moved to the quad cloner and not to the primary cloning object, which is still a possibility because we don't have any real need to put the materials on the top level clone at this point.